Hi everyone, how are you today? This is Larry Port from Rocket Matter, and we're going to talk about Cybersecurity 101 for law firms. If you could just give me a heads up, we have this GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar widget on the right-hand side, and this is, please use it. Please use the questions widget. Let me know if you can hear me. Let me know if you can see the screen. Interact with me. This stuff is in the news all the time. So this is a scary thing. We have client confidentiality to worry about. And let's get started, okay? So I'm assuming you can all see and hear me. Let me know through your questions widget. Good. Let's get started, okay. So I'll tell you what, folks, it's a dicey ball game right now. And I mean, if you're paying attention to the news, basically you have to live under a rock to realize that this is not an issue. Presumably also, you know, this is the self-selecting crowd that wants to pay attention to this kind of stuff. But yesterday we saw another ransomware attack, and I'm afraid to tell you that this is going to be a continual problem. We saw this again in May, and with Wannacry, and that was the first real big one. But the Petya attack that happened yesterday is still reverberating around the world. It started with some Ukrainian tax software or something like that, and it just infects computer networks as it goes along. So it's very serious stuff, and this is the new wave of stuff. There's a lot more in our history that has happened, but this is kind of what we're facing with right now. But a lot of the stuff that we're gonna talk about in terms of defense is going to apply to all these different kind of situations. So I wrote an article about these ransomware attacks, and when the Wannacry virus first happened in May, and basically what you're seeing and what you're hearing on the news is that you're hearing that, like, for example, this enormous Danish shipping conglomerate, Maersk, you've probably seen the ships or the containers, they were attacked, hospitals, big organizations. A lot of times it's these big bureaucratic organizations that are getting in trouble because they have so many machines and they're outdated and they don't have the agility to update their computers with the latest security patches. Little guys like us, or smaller organizations, I'm not sure what the largest law firm is here, but DLA Piper got affected as well. And if they had been keeping their security patches up to date, this attack would not work. The vulnerability that enabled Wannacry and this Petya attack was patched by Microsoft back in about the March timeframe, so it's been out for a while. And if you apply your Windows security updates, then you'd have nothing to worry about. But so these attacks were preventable, but maybe it's the bureaucracy in the organizations or whatever rules they have in place prevented the exploits from being patched. So it's a real shame when these specific types of attacks happen. So when the Wannacry attack happened, and remember, this Wannacry thing is built on the same fundamental technology as the Petya attack, and this happened in early May, and Microsoft released a statement after this. And they said, this attack demonstrates the degree to which cybersecurity has become a shared responsibility between tech companies and customers. The fact that so many computers remain vulnerable 2 months after the release of a patch illustrates this aspect. As cyber criminals become more sophisticated, there is simply no way for customers to protect themselves against threats unless they update their systems. So obviously this is a big deal for Microsoft because their systems are being targeted. And let me tell you something, if you're on a Mac, you're going to be vulnerable too. So it doesn't matter if you're Mac, Windows, or Linux, you have to pay attention to this. We are part of a global system right now, and it is my responsibility as a software provider. By the way, I didn't even introduce myself, but it's your responsibility as a consumer as well. So we're kind of in this together, and if you think about it, it's really, your defenses are only as strong as the weakest link, and I know that that's a cliche, but it is very, very true right now. So back to, I kind of launched into this kind of stuff. Obviously, I'm very passionate about cybersecurity, but my name is Larry Port. I am the CEO of Rocket Matter. I'm a software engineer. Rocket Matter is legal practice management and time and billing software for attorneys. It runs on the web. People can use it from PCs, Windows machines, through their browsers. We also have mobile devices available. We have apps for Android and iPhone, and those are going to get a huge facelift soon. So, I'm ultra paranoid about this kind of stuff, and aside from what we're doing in Rocket Matter itself, the application to keep it safe, we have Rocket Matter, the company, that we have to keep safe too, the employees, the computers here. So, you have the application that we're building, but we also have our own business practices just like you do. All right, I'm going to take a look and see if there's any questions in the question widget right now. And so there's a lot of people writing in, and oh, somebody's asking why you're being muted by the organizer. The reason that is because there's 100 or so people on the call, and if somebody puts us on hold, then we end up hearing everybody's hold music. So all the attendees are on mute. If you have to ask a question, just write it in, and I'll be able to get to it. Okay. A lot of people are talking about the government's responsibility and role in this kind of thing. So that's part of the reason we're in this mess. Okay, so let's talk first of all about why these attacks are happening in the first place. So, and there's a combination of factors that are happening that are making things worse and worse. So, as people on the phone were mentioning, our government is part of this issue, right? So there's this tool that the NSA has been stockpiling cyber weapons, and they were leaked. There's an organization called Shadow Brokers that are leaking these tools. How they got them, it was probably an inside job to begin with, but the tools are there. The tool that's responsible for Wannacry and Petya is called Eternal Blue. And basically what the NSA was doing is that they were exploring systems, finding vulnerabilities, building tools to be able to attack those vulnerabilities, and then stockpiling those tools. Essentially, this is analogous to the CDC stockpiling weapons or biological weapons or viruses such as smallpox or anthrax or something like this, and then these things getting out into the wild. That's essentially what's happened. So the NSA bears some responsibility here for stockpiling these weapons. I don't want to get political in this call, but I will say this, is that there's a real danger when the government stockpiles things. As we've seen, information is hard to keep secret, and a lot of times it's because of inside jobs. One of the biggest breaches that's ever happened in the history of computation or secrecy has been the Edward Snowden leaks. And essentially what he did was download a bunch of information to a hard drive and leave with it, right? So there's continual, you hear, if you're people like me that are paranoid about all this kind of stuff and have your tinfoil hat on with snooping and so on, there's a real reason to advocate that any kind of vulnerabilities are not stockpiled. And this is precisely the reason we're seeing the damage that it's having in the world. Nothing major happened as a result of what happened yesterday with Petya, but I mean, well, that's easy for us to say, but it's major for the organizations that were afflicted. But in terms of a global situation, the Chernobyl radiation levels, the computers that monitored their Chernobyl radiation levels were affected by this thing and taken offline. And now that's being done by hand. So, God bless, nothing major happened from that. But as a result of these vulnerabilities being released into the wild, some major stuff could happen. And you got a hint of that yesterday. Also, some of the things that you hear that the government wants to do is have backdoor channels and ways to unencrypt software. You've probably seen the fights between like Apple and Google and the major tech companies with the government to be able to access and unencrypt their data. And you can see what happens if there's a means or mechanism of unencrypting that data, what can happen if it falls into the wrong hands. So it is an issue. It is a major, major issue. Another thing that's happened is the advent of the Tor Network. And so the Tor Network is essentially a good thing, or at least in theory it was a good thing. It was It is a private network that was established, I believe, by the NSA or the Department of the Navy, one of our government branches, and the idea was that during situations like the Arab Spring or some sort of uprising where in Libya or situations where you needed people to be able to communicate without the government tracking them, that there was some way for them to be able to do that. And so that's what the Tor network does. The Tor network kind of works like VPN, if you've ever used VPN before. You essentially download an application, and it kind of is a little bit similar if you've seen, if you remember logging on to Napster in those days or some sort of file sharing situation. It's kind of like that. You download an application, you double click it, and all of a sudden you're connected to another network of peer-to-peer computers. You're allowed to host web pages on the Tor network. And Tor stands for the onion router, and that's why you see that onion in the logo. And so a lot of the pages have like these .onion extensions that you can go and surf once you're on the Tor network. This is kind of referred to as the dark web. Now, this is where you may have heard of the Silk Road. The Silk Road was a place where you could go and you could buy all sorts of drugs and certain stuff like that. If you want to read some real crypto espionage type of stuff, do a search for the Dread Pirate Roberts, like the name of the guy in The Princess Bride, and the Tor network or the Silk Road, right? And you'll find all this sort of stuff about it. But you log on to these things, and what happens is that when you request a web page, normally in the open web, your IP address goes to that web page, and it's very easy to find out who is requesting that web pages. If law enforcement or whomever need to do some investigation, they'd be able to trace your IP back fairly well. That doesn't happen on the Tor network. Every time you make a web request, your request bounces through different computers and different exit points and requests the resource and finds its way back to you. So it's really difficult to trace who's requesting what on the Tor network, and that's why people are selling fentanyl on it, which is one of the drugs that's driving the heroin epidemic and killing a lot of people right here in Palm Beach County where we live and across the country. You can buy that on the dark web. You can have people killed on the dark web. You can download child pornography on the dark web. Any organized crime activity you can pretty much access on the dark web by logging onto the Tor network. So that is where this stuff is being sold. The ransomware that's being developed and the NSA tools are being sold in the dark web. There's also Bitcoin. Bitcoin is another factor. Bitcoin allows people to pay for things in an untraceable way. A lot of times when you hear about Bitcoin, it has to do with speculation and the value of Bitcoin. But because it's untraceable and because there's no identifiers with it that tie them back to the people that are using it, you can use Bitcoin to purchase anything you want on the dark web. And that is the currency of choice on there. So Bitcoin enables anyone to traffic on the dark web, and you now have a bunch of NSA tools that have been leaked to the dark web, and now you can just buy what they call ransomware as a service, which is a play on like what we are. Rocket Matter is software as a service. So this is the level of sophistication that we're having with cyber criminals right now. They have business models modeled off of legitimate businesses that are happening online right now. So this is a lot of this is organized crime related. There's, and so this is very sophisticated stuff. This is big industry. This is driven by money. Okay, so that's kind of like how we got ourselves to where we are right now. And I'm going to open the questions widget and see what people are asking. Right, so there's a lot of like opinions on this kind of stuff coming in. One said that Wannacry and Petya were likely not criminal. So one of the things that is interesting about this is that the Petya virus had an email address that was quickly shut down. So they think that Petya was it could have been just a poorly executed thing in terms of email addresses and how you pay for this kind of stuff. Other people think that Petya could be a politically motivated thing because it originated in Ukraine, so on and so forth. People are asking what they can do to protect themselves, so we're going to get into that. Before we do, I want to talk about a couple other things that are happening out there. So viruses on your computer, the ransomware is like a new thing. What happens in ransomware is that your computer is taken over and encrypted, and unless you pay a ransom, then your stuff will be encrypted and you won't be able to use it, right? So that's the whole nature of, that's why they call it ransomware. Now, there have been all sorts of other attacks before, and some attacks don't even necessarily harm your system. They might slow down your system because what they do is they install viruses on your machine, and this is going to sound very science fiction, and it's going to sound like total paranoid stuff, but it is how these things operate. It is the truth that we're in. So when malware is downloaded on a computer, it can network with other computers. So the net result is that you have what's called a botnet of thousands and thousands of connected computers. That computing power is then sold on the black market to whoever wants to use it. Those computers can send out spam. Those computers can launch simultaneous attacks against the website, and when that's happened, that's called a distributed denial of service attack. When a website has to handle a bunch of requests in quick succession, it can get overloaded and shut down, and that's called a denial of service attack. So these zombie networks can do this. So a lot of times when you have a virus on your machine, it's just participating in a zombie network. So that's something a lot of people don't know. So, okay, we have all these kind of like forces going on in cyber today, and it's very scary type stuff. So what do we do? So okay, so the option one is we find ourselves a little cabin in the woods in the middle of nowhere. We're all connected, so that's obviously probably not going to work in your case, but that is a viable option, and you probably won't have to worry too much about computer viruses. Now, brass tacks, obviously we have to think about this. The first thing is to update your computers, especially the Windows users out there. Microsoft, and make sure that you're using a version of Windows that's still supported. Somebody asked if Windows 7 is still more vulnerable than Windows 10. Windows 7 is still being supported by Microsoft. There's going to be earlier versions of Windows that aren't supported, and you're going to have problems with those. So I don't know what those are off the top of my head, but if you're running some sort of like crazy old computer, I would just pay the money and upgrade it. And figure out what you're going to do. So let me show you something over in Windows land for a second, because I am presenting this on a Windows machine. Okay, so this is Windows Control Panel, what you're looking at right here. There's make sure that you're doing this if possible. And like I said, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So if you're in an organization of 10 people, they all need to be updated, right? It can't just be a couple of things. It has to be everybody. If you want to have a secure organization, you all got to be on board. You all got to be doing the same things. So in Windows, this is it. This is, the Windows update. Make sure that your device is up to date. If all of the people that suffered the Wannacry attacks and the Petya attacks had done this, they wouldn't have had this happen to them. Again, a lot of them are in ungainly bureaucracies, but in a small law firm, there is absolutely no excuse for this not to be the case. Mac users too, you should be updating your software. A lot of times the software gets updated because of security issues. If you see that there's a security update, and on Macintoshes, this comes in with a software update thing. So on Windows, this is just, it works a little bit differently. You just see an update specifically for your Windows machine. And on the Mac side of things, your updates kind of appear in the same place that other updates appear. Like if you have updates to Evernote and so on and so forth, it's in the software update tool that's underneath the Apple menu in the upper left corner of your machine. This is in the settings section of Windows that you're looking at right here. Install antivirus software, okay? No reason why you shouldn't have antivirus software installed both on Windows and on Mac. Now, Windows 10, and I'm new to Windows. I've been using a Mac for the past 14 years, but I haven't been too impressed with what has been coming out of Cupertino lately, so I actually bought a Surface laptop for the first time in a long time. So I'm extra heightened about security right now because I am running Windows. It comes with antivirus software. So let's go back to that for a second. They have this thing built in called Windows Defender, and you can open the Security Center and and run scans. The way that these things are supposed to work is that when you first download antivirus software, the time to do it is probably in the evening, because it runs an initial scan on your system and then it runs differential scans as time goes on, right? So if you first run antivirus software like in the middle of your workday and you're unaware that this is how this stuff works, it can really significantly slow down your computer. So I would recommend, if you don't have antivirus software, to download it today and run it tonight, and continue to make sure that you have updates for your antivirus software and can make sure that it continually runs scans. Let's see. Any questions so far? Please make sure you write those in. Okay. There are a lot of questions coming in. I'm not going to be able to answer all of them. Somebody's asking if Windows Defender is sufficient. You know, if anybody's going to know how to protect Windows, it's going to be Microsoft. You know, whether or not you want to install additional layers, like some people are like, install 3 of everything. That's how they feel. So I have on my browser screen, you should be able to see it, a couple of options that I know people use. So this is WebRoot, and this will work on Mac or PC. And you can see down here, there with the times, it says WebRoot protects customers from the new Petya-based ransomware. Learn more. So WebRoot is one option for you. Another one is BitDefender. So BitDefender is one of the leaders in this space. You've probably heard of it yourself. So this is another option for you to look at. So outside of the native stuff that comes with Windows, and for the Mac users, I would take a look at WebRoot or BitDefender if you're interested in antivirus software. Okay, consider using LastPad or 1Password for unique or difficult passwords. Now, my belief is that you should have different passwords for different sites, and that you should, they should have a level of complexity to them. And I highly recommend using 1Password or one of its competitors, LastPass. I threw LastPass in here because I feel obligated to display a competitor to 1Password, but I use 1Password. Now, a bunch of recommendations recently came out from the government. They're NIST, kind of recommendations for security within the government, and they don't recommend necessarily for complex passwords or changing them all the time, because what they believe happens is, and this is oftentimes the case, is that when you have complex passwords that change all the time, people end up forgetting them, so they'll write them down. Now, having a password written down is not a good situation either. So that's why things like 1Password or LastPass are very valuable, because they're able to store your password. And in Rocket Matter's organization, the way we have it, we have everybody using 1Password. And let's say that we have an employee that we have to fire, or that leaves, or that we're concerned about, or whatever the reason is, we can force change passwords across all the machines. Nobody knows what any of their passwords are here. People just use 1Password to log into whatever situation they're in, whatever tool they need to use. That's kind of how it works. The reason you want to have different passwords is because a lot of sites don't store your password in an encrypted format. That's kind of hard to believe. But passwords, when you type in a password, the way it's supposed to be handled securely by a tool like Rocket Matter or Dropbox or any kind of online tool, it gets run through this mathematical function called a hash function, and it gets stored in the database that way. So your password will get run through that. There's no way to reverse engineer that. Your hashed password, it's kind of like a one-way scramble. It's kind of like you drop your password into a blender and it turns a certain color. So the next time you log, and when you set your password, that's what it does. It hashes it up and it makes it into this gobbledygook. But every time you pass it, it runs through this mathematical function, and if the output matches what's stored, you can log in. But there's no way to take that hash thing and reverse engineer it to get your password out of it. Now, that seems, at least to me, that seems straightforward, because I've been dealing with this kind of stuff for a long time now. But some sites were not encrypting passwords, and when hackers would go in and retrieve all the passwords, then they'd be able to use those passwords against other sites. That's why it's important to keep different passwords for different sites, just in case of how they're storing them. Now, I would like to believe, and I'm almost 100% certain, that your major financial sites are hashing your passwords and storing them in a secure way. But if you're using the same passwords for them as you're using for other things like whatever service, then I don't know that it's necessarily safe to do that. And in any case, you can't go wrong by having multiple passwords. So I am going to demonstrate one password usage here when I talk about two-factor authentication, because I'm going to show both at the same time. Okay. Okay. Don't click on emails unless you're 100% sure it's okay to click on those emails. And I have a little article here. I would highly recommend you reading one of these, like top 10 ways to spot for a phishing email. Now, remember the very fun 2016 presidential election we had here in the United States? You may recall all the news about the John Podesta leaks and the Colin Powell leaks. What happened there is that they fell victim to a phishing attack, believe it or not. A phishing attack is when you receive an email that looks like it's from a legitimate source, whether it's your bank, whether it's Rocket Matter, whether it's your email or whatever, and you click a link in that email, and instead of being taken to the real site, you are taken to an imposter site that looks so good you can't even tell the difference. So the imposter site is set up by the malicious actor, and the email is sent by the malicious actor, and the emails look legitimate. And when you click on the link, this is where you run into problems. And I would imagine that John Podesta and Colin Powell are very, very sophisticated men, and they still fell victim to it. There's ways that you can find out. And I'm going to demonstrate this, but if you look at this, this is an email that I got from just to confirm your email thing for a service that I signed up for. And when you hover over links, you should be able to see the URL, which is on this slide. It's circled on the bottom of the screen there. So you can see that it's https://www.eventactive.com/request. Now, make sure that the URL matches the link, okay? And so let's take a look at this, all right? Here is my email, all right? This is in Gmail, but it works the same way in Outlook, okay? And if you hover over this call to action where it says confirm email address, you'll see my status bar down here in the lower left-hand corner raises, and the link is in there. You can see it right down there. And you can see the first part of the URL, and it's going to be very, very tiny for you guys, and you may not be able to see it at all, but it says eventactive.com. And that's who it's coming from, and so on and so forth, right? So, you know, making sure that those URLs match. If you hover over this and it's some sort of .ru, like Russian address, then, you know, obviously that's bad. And there's actually companies that train you on how to look and how for phishing email attacks, and they do these diagnostic services. In fact, I have one of them right here. This is Wombat Security. I actually have a friend who works for this place, and what they do is you sign up for service with Wombat, and they'll send your organization emails, and they'll see who's clicking on what. And then they'll give you this little report that such and such is, you know, not being very careful. Such and such clicked on an email that had misspellings in it for a brand name, such and such, you know, and it'll rate people because different phishing attacks are more sophisticated than others. So, you know, phishing is scary, and it catches you when your guard is down, you know, when it's maybe late at night or something like that. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here for a couple of questions and see what we got. People said, is it safe to save passwords to Chrome? So one of the things that Chrome does is that because you can run Chrome on different systems and you can log into a Google account And so your passwords will match from one system to another. And the answer is that Google typically knows what they're doing, and I think that it is safe to use Chrome. I don't always use the same browser, and I am not always logging into something that is browser-based, and 1Password helps me with that, right? Oh, by the way, we have a comment in from attendee Ricardo, who says that Malwarebytes is another nice supplement for malware and antivirus protections. Well, running multiple antivirus programs create conflicts, and as far as I know, no, that's not an issue. That what may happen if you run multiple antivirus softwares is that you may suffer performance degradation on your machine, meaning that it might not be as fast as otherwise might happen. There seems to be a guy on the call, Jonathan, who is very well versed in security, who is adding some interesting comments, and he's saying that LastPass keeps getting hacked about once per year. So that sounds undesirable. I mentioned LastPass just because I feel compelled to mention an alternative to 1Password. I exclusively use 1Password, and if LastPass is indeed getting hacked once a year, I would avoid it. So consider me corrected there. Okay, let's see, where else do we have? Do people using Macs need antivirus software too? Absolutely, you need antivirus software. A lot of people on Macs are lulled into this sense of complacency because so many of the attacks are happening on Windows, but more and more people are using Macs. They represent larger and larger base of computers. I'm sure a lot of people would love to weaponize all that computing firepower in terms of bot networks. So do not think that just because you're using Macs, and you've started to see in the news Mac attacks here and there, just because you're using Macs does not mean you are safe, especially if you're using client confidential information. I mean, we're in a new age, right? We really have to be very, very careful. Somebody's asking, are sites required to notify you if they use encryption? And what I'll do is I'm going to show you something in the browser, okay? About that. Let me go back over there. Let's continue with that, and then we'll talk about encryption in a second here. All right. So use two-factor authentication. The way two-factor authentication works is that you log in, and then something else happens requiring additional piece of authentication. Now, this, the first time I ever saw two-factor authentication, I didn't even know what it was. I was working for a big investment bank. I was doing software development for Morgan Stanley. And when I would log into their network, I would log in with a username and password, and I had a little key fob with these random 6-digit numbers. It was an RSA key fob that would change all the time. And so it would change like maybe once every 30 or 60 seconds. So I would quickly type in the number on the key fob after I authenticated with my username and password, and I would nervously do it before the number changed on me, and then I would get in. Okay, so that's two-factor authentication. Now, a lot of services are using two-factor authentication now. And for example, Rocket Matter has two-factor authentication. If you're not using it, I suggest you turn it on. We use this Google Authenticator tool. So you get this Google Authenticator tool on your machine, on your phone, and the code gets sent to your phone. It's an Android, obviously Google Android capable, and iPhone capable device. So you log in with your username and password, then you log in with the code that gets sent to you. So it makes it very, very secure. And this other program that's pretty common is called Duo. I've seen Duo all over the place. And so I'm going to show you how Duo works because I'm going to log into our blog, and we use Duo to secure our blog. So without further ado, I'm going to demonstrate 1Password, and I'm going to demonstrate Duo on this demonstration now. All right, so let's go back over here, and let's go, this is my WordPress blog login, and you see this little link in my browser, that's 1Password. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in here. Now it filled in my password for me, and I'm going to click login. Okay. Now, so now I'm getting challenged by Duo, this authentication method, and it's saying that it wants a Duo push or call me or a passcode. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is, it's a good thing I have a good hair day today, although I'm not wearing a dress shirt. I am going to turn on my camera for a second so you can see, hopefully you can see me. Okay, yep. Sorry about that, new computer. This is not, I don't have the webcam permissioned. I'm just going to click this, and you're going to kind of have to take my word for it. So I'm going to click send me a push, and right now what's happening, I'm going to narrate what's happening. I just got a login request on my Duo app on my phone. So what I go into Duo, and it says that a request has been rating. I have to tap it to respond, and I'm going to, and there's either a green checkbox or a red checkbox. I can approve it or deny it. Since I know it's coming from me, I'm going to click approve, and I just clicked approved on my phone, and it said success logging you in. All right, so that's how that's working. Now, one thing, I just closed that because, you know, once we log in, there's all sorts of our stuff in there. I don't want to necessarily share that on the screen. Another thing I want to show you about 1Password is that they have password generators, and they generate wicked tough passwords. So check this out. I clicked on the password generator, and this thing up here with the T !68 that I've just highlighted, that's the password that they created for me. The password length is 24. I can choose to allow digits, allow symbols, allow ambiguous characters. So if you get sites with different password rules, then you can rejigger this thing to, you know, increase the length, decrease the length, do all these kind of things, and develop these super strong passwords. And so automated password creation and saving in 1Password is a really powerful way of keeping passwords safe. Okay, allow you to write in any questions about 1Password or two-factor authentication. Use encryption whenever possible. Aha. Okay, so when a site is using encryption, first of all, there's a lot of different encryption, right, that we can talk about here. What encryption is really a math thing. And what it does is it takes clear text and runs it through a function that encrypts it. Now, in the case of passwords, right, like I was saying before, that could be one-way encryption. You know, you run something through a mathematical function, it encrypts it, and you can never unencrypt that. What you can do is encrypt other things and match them against each other to see if they match. That's kind of a one-way encryption type situation. Two-way encryption, obviously, is that you can unencrypt something on the other side, right? Now, websites allow it for encryption, and I'm sure if there's Rocket Matter users, if you've ever purchased anything on Amazon, and I'm guessing you have because apparently all the retail stores are now going out of business. So, you know, HTTPS is encryption over the web. So, and when a website is using HTTPS, what you have to do is you have to buy something called a cert. So Rocket Matter has to buy a security certificate or a cert, and we install it on our server. And that's what let your browser knows is that you're using a secure connection. And there's certain people that sell them, and they're bona fide and all that kind of stuff. So when you go to a secure website, you should know that it's a secure website. So let's go back over to the browser for a second and see what that looks like. All right. So let's go, for example, to rocketmatter.com. Okay, now you can see that there's a lock next to it. That means that the site is totally locked, right? If that secure thing is not there, then it is not totally locked, right? It is not completely encrypted. And the encryption that happens in a browser means that the encryption is happening not on the machine level, it's happening inside the browser. So when the traffic is going from, in this case, Chrome, all the way to the Rocket Matter servers, it's being encrypted the entire way out through my machine, out over my Wi-Fi network. It's encrypted over my Wi-Fi network through all the different machines that it has to go through until it eventually gets to our server where it gets unencrypted. Okay, so That means that if you're on a public Wi-Fi hotspot and you're using an encrypted website, then no one can see the traffic that you're transmitting unless they're looking at your screen. So that's how encryption works on the web. Now, when you're using an app like that you download onto your phone or something like that, you don't really have a way of knowing whether the app is communicating to the server through encryption. So when you're dealing with software vendors, you're going to have to ask that question. You're going to have to ask them if the traffic between their smartphone apps and their servers is encrypted. Because on a browser you can see it, but on an app there is no lock that shows you that this is taking place. All right, I'm going to take a look at the questions widget and see what is happening. Let's see. Somebody asked, for Macs, which is the best browser? I prefer Chrome. I mean, Chrome is definitely the market-leading browser at this point. And Chrome is a safe browser. It's a secure browser. You know, they do tests against these kind of things, and it comes out ahead. But believe it or not, like Chrome, I believe at this point has over 40% of the browser market, and things like Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Safari are in the minority. Somebody's asked, do you recommend Boxcryptor in their, I'm not actually, the one-off file encryption services. So yeah, there's other, like, there's services that you can layer on top of things like Dropbox or Box, and I'm not sure if that's what the questioner is asking about, that encrypts files locally on your machine. You can encrypt your local, it's called volume encryption when you encrypt your local machine. There's a danger with encryption though, and there's a danger with encrypting your own files, and here's what that is that if you lose your password or you lose, you know, whatever it is you need to unlock that encryption, your data's gone forever. So encryption is a double-edged sword. You have to be very careful with it, but you got to make sure that you're using a password that you could never possibly forget, right? Or that is secured somewhere in 1Password, or that you write it in a sealed envelope and give it to your attorney, you know, something like that. Like once you lose your passwords to your data, and you have encrypted software, you're never getting it back, right? So anyhow, something to ponder as you're going down the security path. There's a saying that a concrete house with no windows and doors is 100% safe. The problem is you can't use it. So the question then becomes, how do you pragmatically live in a digital world with appropriate levels of safety, but still not reduce your effectiveness to be able to do your work? And that's my tips here are kind of geared for that aspect here. And if you have any questions about that, definitely let me know. Okay, now backing up your data, external hard drives and cloud software are great options. Now, data is so cheap, or data storage is so cheap right now. It's one of the biggest commodities that we have. I think a 1 terabyte drive now costs something like $50. It's like crazy cheap how cheap this stuff is. And if you use cloud-based services, it's even cheaper. It's like unimaginably cheap. And 1 terabyte, just so you get a sense, is 1 trillion bytes. That is such a large number, it's hard to even begin to comprehend. If you're using a lot of video, then you may be able to fill that up, but if you're just using documents, there's no way you'll ever be able to fill that up. Cloud software, in terms of like straight backup options, you know, CrashPlan's always a great option. You know, that there's a bunch of offline, or there's a bunch of online storage providers. Mozy's another good option. There's so many of them, it's hard for to even like enumerate some of them. Even backing things up to Google Drive or OneDrive or Box or Dropbox or something like that, at least if you get a ransomware attack and your whole volume is encrypted and you can't unencrypt it, at least you're going to be able to move on with your life. If you don't have backups of your systems, then you're not going to be able to move on with your life. So definitely back up your data. And the last thing I have to say is that I hope you get involved. You know, this is serious stuff, and it requires kind of all of us. And if you'll indulge me to get up on my soapbox for 1 second, take a look at what the Electronic Frontier Foundation is doing. It's a It's kind of a digital privacy organization. And I mean, they also do digital civil rights and, you know, things like that. They're very highly involved with net neutrality and so on and so forth. So I understand if, you know, that maybe goes against your politics. I happen to support it, full disclosure. But, you know, tell your congressmen, tell your representatives that the government should not be stockpiling vulnerabilities like this, that they should not be requesting encrypted backdoors into things, because we're seeing where this gets us, right? You know, so, but the Electronic Frontier Foundation has an attorney network that allows you to get involved as well. So if you're one of these guys or gals that's like looking for a cause to get involved in, meet other interesting attorneys that are interested in the same thing you're interested in, take a look at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, because they do a lot of good stuff, and they are looking for people to help them on a legal front, as well as, you know, people like me that can just help with donation or time or whatever. So let's see. That's my presentation, and if you have any questions for me, you don't want to ask necessarily on this webinar, but if you want to ask me anything, you can always email me, larry@rocketmatter.com, right? Very approachable. I'm not scary. I do run the company. I am a software engineer, but I am quite a normal person that likes to talk about this kind of stuff. I will be in the Northeast for a lot of July, so if you're in the Massachusetts or New York area, let me know. We can definitely connect this summer. I'm always looking to meet up with people. If you have any questions about Rocket Matter or our security practices at Rocket Matter or our application stuff, happy to put someone in touch with you. And if you're using old software that's running on Windows, older versions of Windows 95, because there's a lot of legacy legal software out there. If you need a transition plan, we're happy to talk to you about that as well. Okay, let's take a look at the questions widget and see what people have to say, if there's anything else. So, oh, people said thank you. Definitely appreciate that. A lot of these things are kind of like things that I can't answer. Somebody's talking about backup, like workflow issues. I'm a big fan of automatic backups. I'm a big fan of things that run automatically to back up your data, whether they run in the middle of the night or they run after things change. So if you're talking about backing up workflow issues, that's what I would highly recommend. And people are asking about individual tools. I don't know every individual tool. I'm not able to weigh in on each one that people are asking about. I can only really kind of talk about the types of tool in general that people are using and the kind of like largest, most commonly used ones. So for those of you that joined late, in addition to Windows Defender, the antivirus software that I recommended was BitDefender, that runs on both Mac and PC, and also WebRoot that runs on both Mac and PC. So those are some of the things that I recommended, and I also recommended for password safety using 1Password. I had on my slide an alternative called LastPass, but somebody wrote in saying that they have had multiple breaches and to avoid them. So we appreciate that as well. Thank you very much, and I really do appreciate all of your time today. And if I wasn't able to get to you, I'll look for your questions. They get recorded into the GoToWebinar information, and I will try and reach back out to you. Thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure.